Hey, this is Edwin Dearborn, another edition of Growth Driven. And today we're going to be talking about how you can become a better public speaker. Because when you're a better public speaker, I don't care who you are or what you do, you're going to attract more attention, you're going to build your leadership. And with me today is public speaker extraordinaire Lance Miller. Hey, Lance, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So this is Growth Driven. If you're listening to this podcast, this is Lance Miller. I've known Lance for, I don't know, probably over 20 years. And Lance is a championship public speaker. And we'll be sharing with you his website here very shortly where you can find out more about him. But Lance, I was very excited to have you because I know we've got this crazy COVID stuff happening and public speaking is a little changed online, but you and I know we're going to return back to that world. And so I think you have valuable insights, and I thought we'd start out with just telling your story. Like, how'd you get involved in public speaking and how did you grow your skill set in that?
Well, thanks. It's been almost about 30 years ago. Quite honestly, it was interesting how I did get involved. I had been audited 6 times by the IRS, and I was getting very irritated. And it wasn't because of a bunch of financial things going on. They were sort of politically oriented issues. Okay. I won't go into all that, but I felt it was un-American. I didn't like it. And I went to an organization that was proposing a tax system we didn't need an income tax or an IRS for. And they needed someone to speak. And I said, I'll stand up and speak about this. And that's actually where I started. Now, I'd always wanted to be a speaker. I'd always enjoyed leading through high school, college, but I wasn't doing it as a profession. But I started speaking, debating federal tax policy. I did over 300 radio shows, spoke all over California, Nevada, Arizona. I had groups that would give me standing ovations, and I had groups that walked out of the room. And about a year later, I started getting involved in the Toastmasters organization, which is one of the largest communication and leadership programs in the world. And I started learning the basics of how do you actually organize a speech? How do you connect with the audience? If you're not connecting, what should you do to connect? If you are connected, what do you do to not get disconnected? All these types of things. And the big thing, I'm a huge proponent of the Toastmasters program just because of this. It's a safe place to screw up. It's a safe place to make your mistakes. Nobody's going to jump down your throat. You're going to get feedback. You're going to pat on the back, come back next week. We're going to love you. And that's really what it was for me. I got in there. I was able to make mistakes, but develop the skills. And through that, I wound up speaking out on a number of social issues. I wasn't a professional speaker, but I was speaking in a professional capacity. I was very heavily involved in human rights, specifically religious freedom and human rights on an international basis. And spoke all over the world on those points. And it wasn't that I wanted to go do it. There were issues going on and people said, we need someone to speak. And I said, I'll do it. There was nobody standing in line to do it. I was willing to go talk. And then it was in 2004, I got hired as a presenter for a financial company that sold equity indexed annuities to seniors and teachers, and they gave them a free chicken dinner to listen to my presentation, and a lot of people came for the chicken. But that was actually a great experience because I had a very dry subject, which was savings and investing and what to do with it for an hour to an hour and a half, that I had to entertain these people that had come for a free chicken dinner. And I had to engage with them. And then I was graded on how many people signed up with the agent that was there. And I had some of the highest sign-up returns, and I enjoyed that once I actually got into the groove on it. But in 2005, in the Toastmasters organization, you'd mentioned that they have several different speaking contests, and there was one that goes to one winner in the world each year, and it starts with about 35,000 people from 126 countries. It goes up 6 levels over 6 months, and there's one person left standing. Now, I'd competed in that for 13 years, but the 13th year I won that, and you're crowned the world champion of public speaking in Toastmasters, which is sort of the golden ring that everybody wants in the organization. And so I was invited all over the world at that point to speak on communication, leadership issues, and to train people within that organization on how to get more out of it. And that opened up the door to corporate training, to working with a lot of companies that teach people administration. I've got a very extensive business background I was able to tap into. So that's sort of a little bit of my background. So I've given over about 5,000 talks in about 60 countries over the last 20 years. So.
Wow, that's incredible. I think, there's a couple great takeaways that you mentioned, Lance. Number one, you just started out in public speaking because you were willing.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily that you were educated or formally trained in it in the beginning. And I think that's a key point is, number one, your willingness will overcome and eventually get you the skill sets if you just keep at it. Number two, you found a safe place to screw up, as you said, by going to Toastmasters. So you went, okay, I'm willing, but I now need to actually get the skill sets. So I think the takeaway here is, guys, if you're listening to this podcast or watching this video right now, it just starts with a willingness to do it, and then back yourself up and go join Toastmasters, get the formal training, get the feedback from people in a place where you can screw up, get validated, get coached, and over you become better. And then I think the other third thing is, I didn't know this about you, where you were speaking for this financial firm. I think that kind of put you in a position of accountability of, is my talk actually converting into business?
Well, yeah, you get paid at the end of it, and they're not going to continue to book you if you don't get paid at the end of it. But just on the willingness that you're talking about, Ed, if I think anybody listening to this, if they look at any area of their life that they excelled in, they had a willingness to excel in it, and they were willing to make the mistakes. They had a purpose behind it. They had a personal drive to do it. And I can look in a lot of areas of my life that nobody comes out of the womb perfect to do things. We have to build the skill set up. Yes. And when it comes to public speaking, and I do a lot of coaching on speaking, and I work with a lot of young speakers, and I explain speaking is like a muscle. And you have to exercise it. And that's why you need to get into a place you can exercise it, because our speaking muscles are very atrophied, because most of our life we're told to sit there and shut up. When we're kids, our parents are saying, be quiet, don't run around the house. You go to school, nobody in school asked me to stand up and give an original thought. 16 years through college, nobody said, gee, Lance, give us an original thought. The whole time I was learning what other people figured out. Nobody was teaching me to figure things out for myself. Mm-hmm. But I was told to sit there and be quiet. They didn't want me to speak up. Then I went to work, and they say, here's where you sit, show up on time, you can leave on time, don't rock the boat, and if we like you someday, we'll promote you. And so the whole time we're criticized, or there's negative results if we speak up, or we speak up and we say something stupid, and then we go, oh God, I should have never said that. So what happens is people become very withdrawn on actually speaking out, because quite honestly, for the first 20 years of our life, we're sort of told to sit there and shut up. So I recommend getting into a program that you can start to reverse that and start talking and get the thoughts out of your head. And I'm also going to just cushion this with saying there are people that don't have that consideration. They are willing to tell you anything. They normally make very poor speakers because they don't listen very well. They're not very considerate of people. They're very egotistical, and they're going to stand up and tell everybody what to do, but they don't connect with the audience well, because they don't consider that anybody should tell them to shut up, that they know best. And that's to me a very detrimental attribute when somebody stands in front of an audience and acts like they know better than everybody in the audience, because there's always people in the audience that are smarter, more experienced, or have been through tougher situations than I have.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's not just a matter of being willing to speak, but are you willing and good and connecting, having a genuine connection with the audience, where the audience is resonating and agreeing to some degree or a greater degree than disagreeing with what you're saying, so that the heads are going up and down. That's what I was told in public speaking is, if the heads are going up and down, you're doing a good job. I mean, that was my first education, was like, well, how do I know if I'm doing anything right? They're like, well, the heads will go up and down. And if they're agreeing with you, then you're doing better than you're not. And I was like,
Well,
okay.
I'm just going to, and again, I've seen so much training. There's trainers that try to skip all the fundamentals that get the heads to go up and down, and they just tell the speaker to walk around going nod like this and try to get all the heads going up and down. No, you want the heads going up and down because they actually do agree with you, not because they're hypnotized and getting the heads going up and down on it. But absolutely. No, the thing is, you can, and just to that point, I will just say this: I've spoken in front of groups that I thought I did horribly. Nobody liked it. They were totally unresponsive the entire time, and I'm giving everything I can into this thing. And I come off and go, gosh, what is wrong with this group? And I have 15 people come up to me and tell me that was the best talk they ever heard. They want their grandkids to hear what I said and stuff like that. I've spoken in front of other groups that were, lively, and I seem to be doing great. And a lot of my speaking, I have products I sell at the back of the room, and everybody's engaged and stuff like that. And nobody comes back and buys a thing after the talk. So one of the things that and this is more of an advanced concept, but we're talking about it right now. When you're up there speaking, you're up there, and just give it everything you can. You have no idea what's really going on in the head of the audience. Just do the best job you can, and don't look at the audience and go, oh God, they hate me, I shouldn't have done this, and then start to back off on your speaking. Just give it everything you can, do the best job you can with that audience, and learn from the experience. And you may be really surprised, like I've been, where that audience actually loved what I said. They just were not used to responding, and engineers and high school students were probably the two worst audiences I ever spoke in front of, because engineers are very analytical and high school students are talked at all day long. And the last thing they need is some aging, balding guy to stand up in front and talk to them again.
So true. So true. Okay, great. Well, hey, if you guys are just joining in or listening to this later as a podcast, I'm with public speaking extraordinaire Lance Miller, and you can go to Lance Miller Speaks, that's with an S, lancemillerspeaks.com, where you can connect with Lance and join his email list, find out about his services, his products, and connect with him there. So again, Lance Miller Speaks. Lance, we've had this shut down because of COVID. We're doing this in January of 2021, this podcast, and we're, starting to, they're talking about, we're going to have a vaccine and things are going to go back to normal. I even hear, even in Vegas, they're booking events for like June and July. They're kind of pretty much, okay, June and July, it'll be over. What do you recommend? Like, why is public speaking such a critical skill in business? And I know that some people think, oh, it's only for these elite executives or for authors or for specific people, but it's really a critical skill for anybody.
No, first of all, my experience, I can't believe what I've gotten to do in my life, because I've been speaking. I've been willing to stand up and talk. And we started on this. I wound up being on, like I said, 300 national radio shows, spoke all over the Southwest, because I was willing to stand up and talk about tax reform and about fair taxation. And it was something I believed in. And then I got to travel all over the world, and I didn't make any money, but I got my trips paid for speaking on human rights issues, because I was willing to speak. But there are all sorts of times that, see, when I'm up in front of a room speaking, everybody sees me. They go, I know that guy, and I'm getting ideas out. So I make contact with everybody in the room. If you're sitting at a table in a conference and you're not speaking to people, you're not making contact with all the people. And if you do a good job speaking, getting your ideas across, you make a difference in people's lives. But communication, I do a lot of leadership training, and organizations run on two primary things. They run on communication, number one. They run on agreement, number two. And in order to get the agreement in the organization, you have to be able to communicate. And communication, you have to get your ideas across. You also have to be willing to listen to people. And what happens as a public speaker, that gets put under a magnifying glass, because a lot of people can talk to people one-on-one, okay, but in my trainings, I'll go, how many people does it take until you're uncomfortable? So if you're talking to someone in the hall and another person walks up, and I'll talk to two, and then another person walks up, then all of a sudden 5 people walk up, and all of a sudden you can't get the words out of your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
That shows how strong your speaking muscle is. But the point is, the only way we're going to get anything done, period, is through communicating and getting ideas and building agreement on where we're going, how we're going to do it. And that communication is critical. And if you can communicate to more people, you're going to do better. But also on the one-on-one communication, if you can communicate to a lot of people, it's a lot easier when you sit down one-on-one, because you're used to sorting your thoughts out, and you're used to speaking with a purpose and intention to get a specific point across.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the biggest things public speaking has taught me. I don't have a tendency to sit down with someone typically and ramble all over the place. I have an opening, I have a series of points I want to make, and I have a point I want to get to in that conversation. So my conversations are very focused. I'm also taking into consideration the person I'm talking to, because there's three things I talk about in public speaking. You need to make sure you know. You need to know your venue, you need to know your message, and you need to know your audience. Well, the same thing's true if you're a boss talking to your employees. What's the venue? You're going to go out and talk to them on the floor with all the other employees. You're going to pull them in your office. Who's your audience? What is that person's viewpoint? They're a minimum wage worker. They've been here for 2 months, and they're not sure they're going to keep their job. What's going to happen? Or they're a senior. They've worked for you for 15 years, and they know better than what's been going on. And then what's the message you're going to give them? And of course, simplicity of public speaking, you want to leave people in a better condition than you found them.
Right. Yeah.
So,
well, that's a good point. Like, what you have to have an end game to why you're communicating. And that is to leave people better off. I don't think people look at that there is an end game to public speaking. It's like, I spoke and therefore I'm done.
Right. And the other thing with that, a lot of people, again, ton of speech coaching, a ton of speech analysis that I've done. There's a lot of people that don't understand you need to have not only a clear opening to your talk, and I can't tell you how many people I've heard they just get introduced as, this is Lance Miller, he's going to speak to us about marketing, and the person stands up and looks at the crowd and he says, "Hi, my name's Lance Miller, and today I'm going to speak to you about marketing." And the person just introduced him with that, and I'm going, But here's the other thing I watch this happen all the time, is that once you get into the speech, it can be rolling pretty well, but if you don't have a way to exit your speech, I've seen people go on and on and on trying to get out of their speech. They don't know how to end it. And so they keep talking. And I've watched speeches go on for 10 minutes, and I'm going, the guy's trying to get out of a speech instead of saying, "Folks, let's just remember this, or if you want to contact me, whatever." You have to have a specific ending that ends the speech, and that the audience knows that it's ending. And these are the types of things, unless you get some training in it, you don't understand. You think you're just going to get up there and wing it, and then you wind up in a speech and don't know how to get out of it, or you didn't know that you just repeated the introduction. Or again, there's just been so many crazy openings that I've seen where people try to impress the audience and all they do is disconnect from them. That's what I'm saying. It's a muscle you got to build, and you don't build it. You don't go to the gym one day and handle all your physical deficiencies. You don't go to a speaking course for one weekend and handle all of your speaking deficiencies. In order to speak, you have to speak on a frequent basis so that that muscle is warmed up. And it's one of the reasons I've stayed in Toastmasters all these years, because every week I get to speak in my Toastmasters club. So, but I've probably done 9 presentations this week, granted they all are on Zoom, Zoom or virtual, but I've gotten, I don't have any problem with the amount of speaking I'm doing, but I enjoy staying involved in that and going to the gym every week.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to stay a practitioner. Well, I think that's the other thing, that public speaking really is important, because we've been forced into a Zoom online teleconferencing world, and now we have to present ourselves to a group of, and it's probably, I would say, for some individuals, the last year has kind of exposed their weaknesses in public speaking.
Yeah, the virtual transition is interesting because, first of all, it takes a lot of energy to speak. And the amount of energy that like if you and I were sitting in a coffee shop, the amount of energy that we would expend is not a lot. But if you're standing up speaking to a group, it takes a lot of energy and I'm talking about whether we want to call it our emotional or spiritual or life energy. I'm not talking about we got to throw chairs around, right? So we have to fill that room with our energy. And a lot of people aren't comfortable doing that because whenever they've done that, as I said, there's been some negative repercussion that's happened to them in their life, or they did that and said something they weren't supposed to, or people laughed at them or something. So you've got this whole litany of unpleasant experiences that happen when they really put their energy out there. So it's getting somebody used to really owning the room and filling that room with themselves. But what happens on a virtual basis is you're looking at a freaking computer screen. And so what happens is a lot of people look at the computer screen or look at the camera and they're sort of talking in their head. Yeah. They don't realize they're talking to people. And fortunately, before the COVID thing hit, I have done hundreds, if not thousands of hours of Zoom interviews and Zoom coaching. And I've got an online summit of all the world champion speakers that I put together. And I have an hour to an hour and a half interview with each one of them and things. And so I've done a lot of Zoom virtual communication. And what you realize is you still have to put your energy into your communication. And I do a lot of training in Toastmasters because I was one of the people in my club that built our club up to the number 4 club in the world out of 16,000 clubs. And then I'm a world champion speaker. And so I do a lot of trainings with Toastmasters, and they talk about Zoom fatigue, that people are on a Zoom call and they're like nodding off. And I've been on the call for an hour with them. I said, does anybody have Zoom fatigue here? And everybody goes, no. I said, no. Why? Because I'm putting a lot of energy into my talk and I'm talking to you. I'm not talking to the camera, and I'm relevant about what I'm saying. And a lot of people get on their Zoom call and sort of ramble and don't talk to the people at the other end of the call. And the same thing's true with standing on a stage. You're talking to the people in the chairs, and you have to understand that communication's got to hit the people out there. You can't it's not just putting vibrations into the air that hits the eardrum. It's actually your life energy, your interest, your intention, your drive that comes across. And we've all seen people that walk in a room and the energy just comes up. And we've seen other people that walk in a room and it's like they suck the life out of the room, like off the Dracula effect. They suck the life out of everybody when they come up.
It's like a vacuum. It just pulls.
Yeah, it's like, and as I talk about, it's funny. People go, "Are you an inspirational speaker?" I said, "Well, whenever you speak, you should be inspirational." But see, the opposite of inspiration is expiration. And I said, "Have you ever had a speaker expire you? That means they suck the life out of you, because inspiration means to breathe life into people. Expire means to take life out of people."
It's very, very apt observation of the two types of speakers. I guess you could categorize in broad strokes 2 types of speakers. Do they inspire you and add life, or do they just go, when is this person going to shut up?
Yeah, as they go on. Now let me hit a couple things I think for your audience. To me, the toughest thing about public speaking, the most difficult thing, is to just be yourself and talk to the audience. And the reason I say that is I watch this over and over again. When people stand on stage, they go on stage, they turn into somebody they aren't when you meet them in the hallway. And either they're super reserved and nervous, or they try to be bigger and they try to be more important than anybody in the room, and they try to fill that room with enthusiasm, and they totally lose the authenticity of who they are. And when I was watching speakers and coming up the speaking line, the people that connected with me the most were not the people that just were dynamic on stage and skipping across and had all these clever sayings. They were the people that were truly authentic, and they truly cared. They weren't trying to be the most important person in the room. They believed in their message, and they were just sharing something with you. And so one of the things I talk about is don't tell the audience, share with the audience. But that whole thing about who are you, this is what happened to me. I started speaking, and I was so used to sort of morphing to the groups I was with. And so with my family, I was one way. With my buddies on Friday night, I was another way. When I was at work, I was another way. When I was at church, I was another way. And then all of a sudden, I have 2 people from two different groups meet, and I'd have an identity crisis because I didn't know how I was supposed to be, because I was so used to morphing with the groups I was with. But when you stand up and start speaking, a lot of speakers will try to morph with the audience, and they'll try to be something the audience likes, and that actually puts the audience in command of their speech, and they need to be the source and command of their speech. So gets back to the whole training, going to the gym type thing, is you've got to work this stuff out so that you know who you are when you're standing in front of an audience, and you believe in your message, and you're interested. You really care that the audience gets the message. And that's where the talking to the audience, you don't want to yell at them. You don't want to, try to knock their heads off and things. You just want to be yourself and talk to those people. Tell them what you want to share with them. So that's the hardest thing. It took me a while to get there, but that was the hardest thing, was just to be me, talk to the audience.
Makes a lot of sense. And I could see how when you really evolve and that becomes natural for you to do that, what you just said, as a public speaker, it really enhances everything else you do in business, because it's almost like you kind of find your center, if you will, as who you are and how you want to speak. And it probably carries with you in all of your leadership skills.
Without a doubt. And the whole journey I had to the World Championship, that was a great point you made, was I felt I found my speaking center, and that's where I speak from all the time. But it took that competition and the practice and the preparation I was doing for that competition for me to finally bring this thing down to finally I found my center. And once I found it, it was like, this is a piece of cake. But I said, but most of our life, we learn primarily by mimicking our environment. And as kids, we mimic the words we hear. That's how we learn the language, and we mimic what our parents do. And even though we go to school, so much of our persona that we develop is mimicked by what we see other people doing. And so in that, it's sort of like the environment is telling us how we're supposed to be instead of us deciding how we're supposed to be. And when I stood up to speak, as I said, I put all that under a magnifying glass. It was sort of like peeling an onion. I had to pull all this stuff that I had picked up through life off until I'm finally willing just to relax and be there and talk to the audience. And I'm going to come back around and talk about this again, because I've talked to people and they go, oh, I don't have stage fright. I don't have that problem. And you go, no, you don't. And you know what? When you stand on stage and talk to people, you're the south end of northbound horse. So, there are people that feel like, oh, I don't have that problem, but they're not connecting with the audience. They're not being genuine, but they're very stuck into the persona that they have. And they usually are a little narcissistic and feel that they're super right. And at least that's been my experience. And if they aren't, as my grandmother would say, God bless them.
That's right. No, I've definitely made that same observation. You're correct. I think there's people that get into public speaking that are narcissistic, and they think they're, I remember this one individual that would do that, and he was bound and determined that he was building his brand by being that way. And
he probably was building his brand, but it's not the brand he wanted to build.
Thank you. But he thought he was building his brand, quote unquote, and really with the brand that he was building was the narcissistic guy.
Yeah.
And I tried to point out to him, I said, look, your posts, your speech, the way you write, I don't know if you're intending it or if it's a lack of training or a lack of awareness. I'm not going to sit there and judge why it is. I'm just saying you come across a little self-centered. I didn't use the word narcissistic because that's a strong word.
Exactly.
But, I said, you seem a little bit, there's a lot of I and me in your speech. There should be we and us and you way more than I and me. And it was so funny. It was like I offended him. He no longer wanted to work with me because now I wasn't helping him to build his brand. I think what public speaking can do, if you really embrace it of what it can achieve, you can overcome that, grow as a leader, grow as a communicator, get rid of some of those self-limiting ideas, some of those, for lack of a better word, narcissistic ideas, and then become a true leader. Because I think a true leader is extroverted on others, wants to help others, and is interested in others versus being interesting.
Yeah, I want to touch on this one thing that came up because it's an issue I've seen come into speaking. There's a lot of speech coaching training out there that talks about the UI ratio that you were talking about, the on the thing. And this is my take on it, is it's how you use it.
Of course.
And if you use I am so great and you're not, that doesn't work really well. That's the arrogant speaker that says, I figured this out, most of you never could. That is degrading your audience. But if you reverse it and you use the eyes as from a very humble, sort of self-deprecating basis. It's like it took me 7 months to figure this out. Now, most of you probably would have gotten in the first 2 weeks, but it took me 7 months. But here's what I figured out. What happens, you actually endear yourself to the audience when you do that, because you're putting your audience up on a little higher pedestal and you're speaking up to them as though they are smarter than you. But let me share with you what I learned. Again, instead of let me tell you what I learned because I'm smarter than you, you would have figured this out in 2 weeks. It took me 7 months, but let me share with you what I learned. And the people are normally really willing to listen to you when you go, I don't know if I would have figured that out in 2 weeks. I probably would have taken a year to figure that out. But he granted me the importance or the grace of being able to figure it out in 2 weeks. It took him 7 months. I think he's better than I am, but you're making that decision, right?
Yeah. Well, I think through language and tonality, what the example you're involving them versus speaking at them.
Speaking at them, or more importantly, speaking down to them. And that's what I go,
Yeah.
the whole concept of humble. Humble comes from a Latin word which means ground. And when I read that, I went, ground. Then I went, oh, when you're humble, you're on the ground.
Yeah.
Well, that means I should be speaking, the audience is on the ground and I'm on the stage. So if I'm on the ground, I'm speaking to the audience at that level. Better, let me put the audience on the stage and I'll be on the ground and I'll speak up to the audience. Now I'm actually speaking in a humble manner to the audience, right? You know, and I tell people, well, how would you address an audience that consisted of Gandhi, John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., Desmond Tutu, these incredible people? If you were speaking to them when you say, let me tell you what it takes to be successful, let me tell you what you need to get off your butt and accomplish. No, you would not talk to them that way. You'd say, I'm so humbled to be here. Let me share something in my life to you, because these are such great humanitarians that we're talking to. So on that. So anyway, the point is, and that's why I'm saying just being yourself talking to the audience and not being full of yourself talking to the audience. The other thing I just want to touch on, I actually think that public speaking is a great way to get out in a community, especially for a smaller business. It's a great way to get out in the community and let people know who you are and promote yourself, not from a marketing standpoint. And let's just say that you have a plumbing company, and you don't usually think of equivalent plumbing and public speaking. But if you went out to do presentations at your Chamber of Commerce or your Kiwanis or your Rotary Club, and you talked about the water shortage in California, what's happening, things people can do in their house to save water. You talk about what does it actually cost to put in a tankless water heater, what's involved with that, and what are some of the devices that are coming up. It's an educational program you put forward to people, and you go out there and educate them on your trade. And what will happen is you will position yourself as a leader in the industry and who's someone who has made them more able because you came and spoke to them, and they will want to come do business with you. But you will kill yourself if you try to sell them anything. So what you want to do is go out and educate them on what's happening in your business. I had a friend of mine who was a computer IT guy, and he came up with a way, it was a real simple way of saving files and keeping your files secure. And I worked with him to go out and do talks on how to save files so that you knew where your files were. And he had this little system, and he went out to some Rotary clubs and Kiwanis clubs, and he wound up picking up like 15 clients that he handles all their, their personal IT stuff for them, keeps their computers working for him because they liked him and he seemed to be very knowledgeable in the business. Now, if you take a little larger business, you're going to have an opportunity to go speak at trade shows, trade associations, conferences, where you present yourself to speak to your industry as a leader in that industry, and you're going to make contacts with all those people from that standpoint. So for me, it's a great personal way to make yourself known and to know a lot of people in the area. And that's really one of the biggest assets I think we can create. Yeah, the number of people we know and who know us. And I know from a speaking standpoint, it's one of the biggest assets I have is my Rolodex of people that I know. So when I'm doing my business projects with my team, I go, oh, I know somebody who is the vice chancellor at Pepperdine. I know one of the executives working at Staples Center. Let's see if we can go in and talk to him and run this idea by him or something, because I've spoken in so many places. I have all these contacts all over the place.
Yeah, great point. I think this is a great takeaway if you're a small business owner. It's like, how do I get word of mouth going? Well, I think number one is deliver a good product or service. That's the foundation always for good word of mouth. Is your core delivery is sound and exchangeable. But number two is, even if you're a plumber, go out and speak and add value through the various communication channels and groups that are out there by just helping them and educating them. And by doing so, you're proactively building your own word of mouth for your business. So even if you just wanted to do it from a pure commercial reason, becoming a public speaker could put you on a leading edge to find the best clients out there.
And see, the key to that is there's other people in the industry are not going to be doing it. And
Very
that's
true.
what I'm just talking about. Whether you're in IT or you're in plumbing or whatever, there's always, more about your industry than any layman does.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're able to get your speaking skills down and do a good educational talk, there are tons of organizations that every week need to have speakers that come in. And you're going to hit several duds. Look, I've been doing this for years. You'll go out and you'll hit organizations and people will go, well, that was really interesting. Thank you for coming out. Here's a plaque or a certificate for speaking. And that's all you got out of it. You got a free lunch and a paper certificate. Okay. But you're going to, as you build, and especially if your presentation is based on some sort of current issue that's relevant. That's why, just as an example, I'm talking about a plumber. And I actually I was a partner in a plumbing company, which we did repiping for a number of years. And I have some understanding of that industry. And typically you don't have plumbers coming talking to Rotary or Kiwanis. Okay. But if you came in and you said, what's happening in the industry? What has the industry done to address the water shortage in California or the Southwest or whatever? What are the new materials? We aren't plumbing and galvanized pipe anymore. We actually have flexible tubing called PEX we can use, and we can plumb a house so much faster, and it doesn't pull the heat out of the pipe like copper or metal does, so your water stays hotter. And you can start to go through all this. And if you want to do an addition on your house, what you should look at, people are going to be extremely interested in those points. But then there's going to be some marketing that comes with it. And so you have to be able to position yourself as something that's of interest to the people, so they want to come hear you. And I would recommend, that you don't wear a dirty, greasy shirt that you just climbed out from underneath somebody's sink before you went and talked to them. But if you showed up in your plumbing uniform, that would be fine. I mean, that would be sort of within the mindset from that standpoint. But there's hardly a business I know that you couldn't put together a 20-minute talk about the expertise in that you have in your business and talk to people about it. Even if you're an accountant, the tax laws change every single year. What's the best way to keep your records? How do you download a credit card statement onto QuickBooks? There's all sorts of questions that people would love to have answers to that to you are second nature. You don't even think about them, but other people don't think about them. And just as another tip on that, one of the things you do is keep track of the questions that your clients ask you, and that's the subject of your speech.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny you say that. People will ask me, well, when I do content marketing, what content should I create? I go right down the top 10 or 20 questions you get asked all the time and answer people's questions. It's almost like that's all I got to do. I'm like, well, if they've got the questions and you have the answers, would you not be the authority? And they're like, I never thought of it that way. but it could be that
there's all sorts of, and there's all sorts of people in like the National Speakers Association that will just talk about that. People have written books by just simply sending an email out and saying, what questions do you have on this subject? And they get the questions and they tabulate them and they said, okay, I got 80% of this question, 60% of this question, and that's my book. And I'm going to go chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. It's just an amazing, it's a simple way to do it. And I track questions in my coaching. I track questions in my presentations. I do a weekly video, like a 3 to 5 minute video blog on speaking tips. Right. Okay. And so I just listen to people's questions and then I do my series on them. Right.
That's brilliant. Hey guys, you're listening to Lance Miller. You can check him out at Lance Miller Speaks. That's with an S, lancemillerspeaks.com. If you're listening to this later on a podcast. So, parting words, Lance. What if someone wants to work with you, receive your help? What help? Obviously, they can reach out to you on lancemillerspeaks.com. Also, you're on LinkedIn, so they can reach out. Just type in Lance Miller on LinkedIn. What are some of the services, or some of the ways that you can help people with their public speaking?
Well, first of all, I do a lot of coaching, and I do a lot of it over, Zoom or over the computer right now with what's going on. And I'm quite honestly, Ed, I have a sort of a boutique practice. I have a lot of business activity that I'm involved in. I have a management team that we do startups and turnarounds on companies, and I'm quite busy with that, but I do take select clients on in the speaking area. Okay. Same token, if people are interested in leadership training or leadership seminars, I have some very dynamic leadership programs because a part of this, I'm a trained pilot. I've sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. I've rafted most of the rivers in the U.S., and I have had leadership experiences where that do not rely on textbooks. And part of my approach is leadership involves everybody, and you got to get everybody on the same team. So there's training from that standpoint, seminars, presentations I'm more than happy to do. But if somebody is interested in just having a conversation and seeing if I could assist them, they can certainly send me an email via my website, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I do respond to all that, and I'm more than happy to assist where I can.
Great. Well, Lance, thanks so much. Maybe in about 6 months or a year, we'll have you back and you can tell us, maybe we're back to public speaking again and maybe some more advanced tips. If you guys have just joined us or you want to connect, you've been listening to the whole podcast or video here, and you want to connect with Lance, again, lancemillerspeaks.com. Lance, thanks so much for being with us on Growth Driven. Hopefully my audience here, we're bringing you value. I work to bring what I feel are some of the best people on the planet that can teach you how to succeed in business and marketing so that, as our title suggests, you can drive the growth that you want to have in business. I think it's so important that, business people support each other. We help each other. That is the purpose of this, so that we can all grow, create a great economy. And I think that's even more important than ever before. We've had so many small businesses hurt in the last year that it's time that, we come together and help each other flourish and prosper. So, Lance, thank you for adding to that endeavor.
You're very welcome. I hope everybody got something worthwhile out of their time spent with us.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. Bye-bye, guys.